Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we're back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Stephen Miller. All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been. We're going to ignore these stupid white hippies that all need to go home and take a nap because they're all over 90 years old. Posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Political Revolution subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for a lot of the protests these days against Trump. I personally don't really care for the guy, but I do think a lot of them are performative, and I do agree with Miller's observation that they're mostly elderly. It seems to be elderly boomers and the like. Because mostly all the redditors who always want to protest them are simply keyboard warriors who never leave their mother's basement. So it just goes to show you that, if you want to protest against the current administration, I think that's fine. But I personally think, that's it. Like most politics these days is simply performative rather than anything actually of substance. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have White House says slavery is being taught wrong, should not be so negative, from Newsweek.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the Not the Onion subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for slavery, but I do think that the current way it's being taught is an exclusively American evil isn't that good either. Every society had slavery, and pretty much throughout history up until the 19th century, and that's important to remember as well. I I can see the argument for the American brand of slavery being particularly heinous since it was race based rather than class or merit based. But outside of that, after the Mid-Atlantic slave trade, they sold slaves to tons of other countries as well, and there was also, a lot of the Middle Eastern, they did a lot of slavery as well, but, no one cares about the Middle Eastern slave trade. It's all the Mid-Atlantic slave trade because, you have to see the U.S. as this unique evil, or else, you might as well, then they'll throw all the names in the book at you, like Hitler, fascist, Nazi, whatever, buzzwords they feel like throwing at you, and eventually, you just kind of grow numb to it, and you say, well, if you want to say that, that's fine, I support freedom of speech, but when you call anyone you don't like Hitler, eventually, when everyone's Hitler, no one's Hitler. Then next we have 6 triangles, 144 question political test results, posted by Zevlar, and that's cross post from the Political Compass subreddit. And yeah, that looks like kind of some political compass test. I like the classic political compass. This is just too confusing for me, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have another post from Zevlar, still Lib Center, freedom is the way, and that's another cross post they made to from the Political Compass subreddit. And yeah, it's just a bunch of political compass, and yeah, personally I think the political compass is a useful tool, but I definitely think all these political compasses are a bit much, especially with how, there's tons of stuff on them, and yeah, that's my thoughts there. Then they did another post. I just wanted a cool flag, laughing emoji. I guess I'm too middle of the road for this quiz. My results are first. The results from the post I found this quiz from a second, and that's from another one from Zillar, as I said, and that's another cross post from the Political Compass subreddit. And yeah, that's pretty much the same my same take as the previous 2 posts. Next, we have Trump to sign order directing DOJ to criminally charge flag burning despite being protected speech. Trump pledged to ban flag burning, vote through constitutional amendment if necessary in 2024 from independent.co.uk, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think if you own a flag burning, you should be able to do whatever you want with anything you own. I don't think you should be stealing other people's flags and burning them, but I think if you own a flag, you should be able to burn it, and that's regardless of what the flag is. A lot of progressives, they say, oh, I support flag burning, but then you take out the pride flag and start burning it, and they start yelling hate crime, and that just goes to show you, flag burning, it applies to all flags, not just the U.S. flag. Just because it's a flag you like doesn't mean, if you own it, you shouldn't be able to burn it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Gavin Newsom is punching back. I may not like a lot of his policies, but it is about time someone stood up to the Republicans. And that looks like posted by Ragnar OKXP, and looks like a tweet from the Governor Newsom press office. All caps. Wow, Fox News can't stop talking about me. Gavin C. Newsom, America's favorite governor. Tonight, their entire primetime live was about me. Jesse Waters kept calling me daddy. Very weird, not interested, but thank you. Sean Hannity, very nice guy. Nearly cried because I won't take his advice. Sorry, Sean. Then they dragged out the B team of dum-dums, Meatball Ron, Tommy Toilet Lauren, and Teddy Cancun Cruz. He even flew back special from Mexico, all whining about me. GCN. They had to play the music to shut Ted up about my beautiful hair. I got it, so jealous. Total disaster. MAGA hates me because they hate you. They hate that California is the fourth biggest economy in the world. They hate that crime is down, that we're number one in farming. I love the farmers, manufacturing, tourism, and tech, all while we give affordable health care, free school meals, make America pregnant again, paid baby leave for moms. They should not return anyways, $20 minimum wage, and so much more for the people. They hate that Democrats are winning. Fox and MAGA have Newsom derangement syndrome. They should cry harder. Sad. GCN. And yeah, personally, my thoughts on that are, I don't really care for all this, all caps rage tweeting when Trump does, and I don't really care for the Democrats when they do it either. People are saying, oh, Gavin Newsom's just doing this to boost his profile, and yeah, that's true. Personally, it's just the Newsom always just seems to want attention. He had that podcast where he had Charlie Kirk on to get attention. Now he's doing this to get attention. He clearly wants to be president, but I personally think he's just too unlikable to be president, and that's just that's something you just can't fix, I would say. And yeah, personally, I think, this is this kind of going to be kind of seen as the start as the ironic magnification of the Democratic Party. Soon it's just going to be, soon I think, since the Democrats are pretty much dead in the water outside of, a few social activists, soon they're just going to become just another MAGA party, I think, because, they figured if you can't beat them, might as well join them. So, they're trying to, it's going to be ironic at first, but I definitely do think, the Democrats are just going to be MAGA light soon, and I think they'll probably end up nominating that John Fetterman for president, and it will just be like, and the Republicans will be MAGA, and the Democrats will be MAGA light, and just to show you they're pretty much a uniparty. MAGA, in a lot of ways, is simply performative collectivism, I would say. It's not real it might market itself as populism, but it's just, it's all about, we're gonna take back America and change it back to the way it was when it was great. But America's in some ways has never been great, I would say. It's always had its issues, and a faux populist movement, whether it be from the Republicans or the Democrats, aren't necessarily going to fix those issues. What's going to fix those issues is people, individual liberty rather than the forced collectivism we have currently. Then we have It Is Not Sustainable, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that looks like a tweet from Robert Reich. The explosion in CEO pay relative to the pay of workers isn't because CEOs have become so much more valuable than before. They've just gamed the system to line their pockets. Is it any wonder why so many working people feel the game is rigged against them? Not only is inequality morally wrong, but you can't have a functioning economy when so many much wealth is hoarded at the top. It just won't work. And then he quote tweeted Warren Gunnels, corporate greed at its ugliest. Starbucks CEO paid $96 million, median worker $15,000. Coke CEO paid $28 million, median worker $14,000. Carnival Cruise CEO paid $24 million, median worker $17,000. Chipotle CEO pays $19 million, median worker $17,000. This is not sustainable. And my thoughts on that are, I think, the revenue works. The more you produce, the more you get money. And the CEO, they might not use their physical fear of labor, but they definitely do a lot of planning. And if the Starbucks, for instance, if their profits dropped for like 2 or 3 consecutive quarters, they'd be kicked out, and the median worker doesn't have to worry about that. And yeah, it's these talking points, like corporate greed or the labor theory of value that are pretty much just the backdoor to Marxism. And Reddit, of course they're going to eat it up because, they're pretty much, they're either openly Marxist or communist or secretly Marxist or communist, with a few exceptions. And that just goes to show you that, that they don't understand economics at all. They just think, it's all labor based. Well, in reality, a lot of economics these days isn't physical. It's more planning and the like. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Kansas City poured millions into a grocery store. It is still closed. It's still closed from Lemon Limelight, and that's across. And they said from the Washington Post, it was the lone tomato in the produce bin that nearly made Marquita Taylor weep. She'd stopped in her neighborhood grocery store, the place that was cause for celebration would open 7 years ago. Area residents said Long Live a decent supermarket of Kansas City's east side, and KC Sun Fresh was the city's attempt to alleviate a lack of access to healthy food in its urban center. But the store in a city-owned strip mall is on the verge of closure. Customers say they are increasingly afraid to shop there, even with visible police patrols, because of drug dealing, theft, and the vagrancy both inside and outside the store and the public library across the street. KC Sun Fresh lost $885,000 last year and now is only about 4,000 shoppers a week. That's down from 14,000 a few years ago, according to Emmett Pearson Jr., who leads Community Builders of Kansas City, the nonprofit that leads the city from the site from the city. Despite a recent $750,000 cash infusion from the city, the shelves are almost bare. But the subsidies, cash infusions, and special police presence doesn't matter because KC Sunfresh closed anyways. After months of struggling and millions of dollars in receipts, the Sunfresh Linwood is closed. After the city spent $17 million to acquire and ready to help Sunfresh, it opened in 2018. The nonprofit CBKC took over the stores in 2022. Despite city investments, grocery stores struggled to stay afloat. Shoppers and employers alike reported safety concerns, including flights, drug use, and public sex. Under what conditions is the local government justifying subsidizing a grocery store? Were those conditions present here? And yeah, ultimately, I don't think the government should ever be subsidizing grocery stores. I think that should be a private market thing. The progressives might say, what about food deserts? And, a lot of food deserts, just because the government wants to run a grocery store. The grocery store there doesn't mean it's only going to work. Like this instance here, a lot of food deserts. If there's no economic opportunity, people aren't going to want to go there, and that's true regardless of who's running it. It would be at the government or private industry. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian solution is you got to fix up these food deserts. You can't have people having sex in public. The libertarian position, if you want sex in public, fine, but that should probably be at least stigmatized. And if you have sex in public, you shouldn't be just doing that. And yeah, your area's gonna become a shithole like a lot of food deserts. And that's why I think the libertarians, we need to address the causes rather than just say, oh, we're going to have the government pay for all these grocery stores. And it just goes to show you that Reddit progressives will always say, oh, there's the easy solution, it's just socialism or communism or whatever. But there's not really easy solutions. There's only trade-offs, and that's a big part of the libertarian philosophy, I would say. Then we have NPR Planet Money episode 682, When and Why CEO Pay Exploded, from NPR.org, posted by XGH Ty 737, and that's her. And yeah, as I said in the past one when we talked about CEO pay, but Reddit, of course, is going to be very anti-CEO. They're all about eat the rich, but in reality, a lot of CEOs, a lot of Redditors are the champagne socialists that are probably going to be labeled rich if a class revolution ever does break out. So, it's a lot like Maximilian Robespierre during the French Revolution. He's saying, oh, we got to get rid of all the monarchy. But the next thing his head was in the guillotine. So, it just goes to show you, you can be as progressive as you want to, but eventually they'll turn on you for not being progressive enough. And we have U.S. government takes 10% stake in Intel as Trump expands control over private sector, from CNBC.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine, and they added, what happened to Republicans opposing government control of economy and private sector? And I'd agree with that, just because, the Republicans are doing it doesn't make it correct. I'm sure if the Democrats did it, this would be seen as literal socialism. And in a lot of ways it is socialism, the government just can't be owning stakes in big business. A lot of ways, it's they're at least being open about it. I'll give them that, because big business and big government have often been joined at the hip since they've both been established. But the libertarian perspective is we should have companies shouldn't be too big to fail. Obama shouldn't have bailed out those companies because they were too big to fail. And it's the same with Trump in this instance. If company's too big to fail, it's too big to exist, frankly, and it needs to fail on its own merits rather than have the government save it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump orders halt to nearly finished offshore wind farm from New York Times, posted by Swamp Banky Dan, and that's a cross post from the Connecticut subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think, the government shouldn't be subsidizing wind farms. I think if it was a privately run wind farm, that would he shouldn't be ordering a halt to it. But if it was a publicly funded wind farm and he wants to fund a halt to it, I guess they have, as I've said in a lot of episodes, they have the monopoly and loose support just right whatever they feel like. But regardless, I do think the libertarian solution to energy is privately funded rather than publicly funded. This is a good example as to why the government can ultimately retract its support of any industry, of any publicly funded industry, even if it's almost complete, if it based off their own whatever they're currently feeling. That's my thoughts there. Then we have Trump threatens to deploy the U.S. military into Chicago, signaling the start of a nationwide crackdown. Posted by Swamp Pinky Dan, that's crossed from the LOL subreddit. And yeah, personally, this is just more Reddit political doomerism about the Orange Man, like pretty much every post on Reddit is these days. I'm sure it will mostly just be performative, if anything, just like kind of his DC stunt. And yeah, eventually get tired of all the political doomerism and performative politics. But that's pretty much all politics is these days. It's all just theater for theater kids who can't find work in Hollywood, it seems. And that's my thoughts there. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.